Okay, I think we can start now. So welcome again everybody to this webinar on the exchange of data between PSAPs. We'll begin with some minor housekeeping. So you will have we will have three Q&A times. So if you would like to ask questions to our panelists, you will have two options. The first one is to write your question or your comment, your input in the chat box. And the second one would be to raise your hand. So you will find this option in your Zoom toolbar. And we will give you the floor. For this, we will need to unmute you. And you will be able to ask directly the question or make your comment. We would like to invite all of you to participate as much as possible, so please don't be shy. On the screen now, you will see how you can activate captions for these webinars. For this webinar, these captions can be translated into several languages, so this may be also helpful for you. And when coming back to our topic today, so the topic of today, as you know, is exchange of data between PSAPs. When an emergency requires the intervention of more than a single force, all parties need to know what is happening and where to and to whom. And for this, the data exchange is really crucial. To make this happen, standardization is essential when integrating public safety information from diverse sources. And when dealing with cross-border cooperation in emergency and crisis response activities, complexity is added with the differences in languages and conventions. Today, we'll hear a detailed overview of examples. How do they tackle the exchange of data between PSAPs in the different countries? What are the recommendations we can give to them, and what are the recommendations that we can conclude from their experiences? So we hope that you will leave this webinar with an enhanced knowledge of data sharing between PSAPs, and that will be an inspiration for your own services. For this, I have two panelists. We have two vice chairs of the EENA Technical and Operations Committee today with us, Iratxe Gomez Susaeta and Kiran Mohinigan. And thank you, both of you, for being here and for sharing your knowledge with all the participants. And I now hand the floor over to Iratxe. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and hopefully it will be very interesting for you all to learn what we published in the EENA document about data sharing between emergency services, but also a bit more about the information we provided there. So if you go to the next slide, please, Amy. The webinar will be structured in 4 parts, and as Christina mentioned, there will be a Q&A session after each of the blocks of information. So the first part is about the standardization. The second part, the second part is about the standardization after the introduction. The third part is about use cases, specific national, regional, or international use cases. And then the last part is about the recommendations that we normally put at the end of the documents and also on webinars. So if you go to the first content slide, you see on the right the document outline. I mean, we produced the document last October that was made available for you all. And it was, in fact, an update of the document that we wrote in 2015 already. So from 2015 to now, there's been a lot of changes, updates, technology updates, and so on. So also there were also all sorts of very interesting presentations in past EENA conferences about data sharing between emergency services. But one of the key points is that at European level, and then if we look at what our North American counterparts are doing, there's a lack of standards for European countries in terms of exchanging information between emergency services, so between PSAPs and emergency response organizations uh, during operations. And also cross-border cooperation has its own requirements that need to be taken into consideration. Of course, this regional standardization is very relevant as well, because a lot of countries decide that they go for the national standards or regional standards, and some of them are based in international standards, but others not. So this information also was important to be added to this document. And of course, there have been several contributions from members of the EENA Technical and Operations Committee, but also from other stakeholders from both the public and private sectors about what can be done and what is being done. So if we go to the next slide, we will move into the standardization. And I think it's one of the key points that needs to be discussed first of all. Again, if we look at the North American vision of things with NINA and what our colleagues in NINA are doing, because they are also in the standardization organization, in terms of exchange of information between different stakeholders in an emergency situation, they have specifically produced two sorts of elements that are interrelated. There's a link about the frequently asked questions over there, which covers both elements that are in the slide. So the first one is called Emergency Incident Data Object, EIDO, and it is an approved standard from late 2021, which has been reviewed in 2022. So what this incident data object basically does is actually provide a snapshot in time. I mean, in a given time, during a given emergency situation, this data object shares the information at that point in time. And it's a standardized way of sending these incident details to all to emergency operation centers from the PSAP, or to share that information between the different stakeholders, including, for instance, tow truck operators, utilities companies, even news organizations. So there's a lot of information about EIDO you can find in the links provided in this slide. And in fact, the IDX, the incident data exchange functional element, is collecting the IDOs, which are the functional elements that are used to aggregate them into the situation, multiple situations within an agency, and creating a composition of the status of an incident aggregated. So those are the two main approaches that in the last few years NINA has been doing in terms of standardization. But there's a new one from late last year called the NINA standard for the conveyance of ADOS between next generation 911 systems and applications. So we'll be looking into that also in the future. That came after our document was produced. So sorry about that. And in fact, it's an important thing that NINA has made the open API schema available in GitHub for others to use. So it's an open standard in a sense. If we go to the next slide about the standardization, we move into what international standards are about, not just in a region or country. So there's a few ISO and OASIS standards that, well, OASIS is one of the organizations that cooperates with ISO, of course, that are being used in different parts of the world to exchange information between stakeholders in emergency situations. So for instance, the OASIS standards about the emergency data exchange in the Excel framework includes several elements with like the common alerting protocol, the distribution elements, the resource messaging, the situation reporting, the hospital availability exchange, the reference information model, and the tracking of emergency patients. And those are standards that are being used for example, in France and Spain, and we will be talking about those two later on in the presentation. And CAP, you may be more familiar with CAP because CAP is being used also for public warning, but it's also used in sharing data between emergency stakeholders in emergency situation, not just on public warning. The ISO standard that we're mentioning in this presentation as well, it's the shared situational awareness, has a structured message called emergency management shared information, MC, and it can be used in combination with other elements like the ones mentioned above, like the CAP. So those are international standards, not limited to a region or country, and those are things that are worth looking into. And of course, as I mentioned before, there are national and regional standards like CISO in France, which is based on the EDXL framework, or UCRI in Germany, or ECAS in Ireland, or MITE in the UK, which are national standards, some of them based on international standards, some of them not, which will be presenting in this next section of the presentation. So if we move to the last slide about the standardization, please. The last slide is about the new standards that are coming given the multi-channel orientation, multi-channel communications orientations, the more GIS-centric operations, and so on. So from the broadband communications perspective, there may be standards coming about mission critical video sharing or things like that. So there's some requirements about codecs and things like that, but are there standards leading to standardization of broadband communications in public safety situations? We are not aware of having any GIS standards that are specific for public safety data sharing. There are standards provided by the Open Geospatial Consortium, OGC, for general data exchange, but they are not specific to public safety situations or emergency situations. And there is an initiative in Europe called the Interoperable Europe for reinforced public sector interoperability, but there's nothing specific about public safety, in fact. So it could be an idea to actually have public safety collaboration, data sharing, data exchange requirements part of this European interoperable initiative, or the Interoperable Europe Act. Well, this is what we wanted to mention at this point about standardization. We will open the first Q&A, and I think there is already a question in the Q&A for this. Christina, you take over, or?
Yes, yes, sure. So first of all, just to make sure that you know that the presentation and the recording will be available after the webinar. And I see one question. Can you explain what maybe there will be a new standard means? What is needed to make it happen?
Well, the first thing is that we are not, I am not aware of all the standards that are available for broadband communications, for instance. So talking with colleagues and talking with experts on this field, they insist on saying that there are a few things about codecs being needed to be available on both sides of the communications, and also all sorts of things like that. But as far as I know, there's no specific standard about broadband communications and data sharing when we're talking about video and rich communications like that in an emergency situation. So maybe means that either we're not aware of any existing standard, or there's no standard yet. And what is needed to make it happen? Well, that's a very good question. So what should we need in terms of making standards happen? Christina, Kiran, what do you think?
So from a standardization perspective, and I'm personally part of two groups of standardization, so it's a very small piece of cake because the standardization world is very big. So how this works is usually the organization has to be first a member of the standardization organization. This means in Europe you have to be member of Sensenelec or ETSI or other standardization organizations. Then usually this is a contribution based work, so that there is an initiative of one organization who would like to have a standard on a specific topic. This organization needs to propose this. There are different ways to propose it, and it depends a lot of the procedure of this specific standardization organization. And then, of course, there's a need of writing the standard, and a consensus or a voting procedure is also needed. So this is for some standards. Others, they come from standardization mandates, from example, coming from the European Commission. The European Commission asks the European standardization organizations to create or to update a specific standard. And then there's usually some people working on it. It may or not be funds to create the standard, and there's a whole procedure to vote it for comments, etc., etc. So who should start the creation of the standards? So it can be a private organization, a public organization, or through a mandate from public authorities.
It's also worth pointing out that it all depends on what the requirement and the driver is. That it may not be that a completely new standard is required for data exchange, because as Irache mentioned, there's a variety of standards already there. But what may be more appropriate is as opposed to a technical standard, a technical recommendation on how the existing standards can be used for the exchange of data relating to emergency communications. So if you take the GIS information that was mentioned on the last slide, the OGC has a very, very flexible and comprehensive standard for the exchange of GIS information. But how do you apply that, and what's the most appropriate way to apply that to exchanging GIS information relating to emergency communications and emergency situations? I think that's worth considering, that may be an appropriate approach.
Oops, sorry, I'm muted. Indeed. I don't know if we need to devote more time for the Q&A on this section or move to the next one, because it's quite pertinent also on the topic, because Kiran, you will be speaking about the situation with ECAs in Ireland.
Yes, absolutely. And I think in Ireland, in the emergency call answering service, is probably a good example of how, a national standard developed organically as a two-stage PSAP setup, where we have the call answering service connecting calls to the responding emergency services. We're separate organizations. We don't use the same system. So absolutely, from day one, there was a need for us to pass primarily information on caller location to the responding and connected emergency services. At the time, we looked and there didn't appear to be any firm standard for the exchange of this information. And our platform supplier already had an existing XML type interface. So that was what we used, and it's been used and enhanced or modified slightly over the past 13 years. For example, when we introduced postcodes in Ireland, we modified the interface to have a specific field for the postcode so the emergency services could use them. Similarly with AML, we had to modify the interface to represent an AML position and pass that to the emergency services. So it's been used, or it is used extensively, by the emergency services in Ireland. It's a pull type XML interface. So they all have connections to us in through what is it's a government network, but it performs the role of an EZInet effectively. And when a call is received by them, they pull the data from our systems. That's primarily position-related data or caller location data, but it also includes various aspects of the call should they wish to use it. It's not a closed interface, but it's not a standard or XML schema. But it is quite comprehensive, and over the years, each individual CAD manufacturer has had to implement support for our specific interface, which they have done, and it works quite well. That's pretty much it, really, unless I'm forgetting anything, Arache.
No, I don't think you are. I mean,
No.
in fact, in the previous section, you already mentioned that it's worth having technical recommendations on how to implement international standards. Other than that, if you don't have those, you will write your own standard, as you did in
Which is
Ireland.
what we did.
So yes, definitely.
And in fact, it's fair to say that it as a national standard, it became the de facto standard. It's I think if we were approached by a CAD manufacturer and saying, well, can you support or can you give us the data in this industry standard interface, then we would say absolutely, we'll develop the support for that. But to date, nobody has.
Okay, so far so good then.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Kieran. Let's move to the next slide, and we will have some time for questions later on as well. So the next two use cases we are presenting, the first one is the German case. Germany has an universal control room interface, which serves precisely to share data between stakeholders in emergency situations. And it's an interface specification that is quite new, and it's being deployed across Germany with the first implementations in PSAPs in Berlin, Saarland, and Saxony for sharing information between the PSAP and the medical emergency services. So there's a lot of information about TÜKRI in German. If you understand German, other than that, you can use translation tools that are better and better with the years. So it's a good example of national standard, which is not specifically based on an international standard, but feeds a bit about international standards as well. I mean, it's learned from international standards, although it hasn't implemented any of those yet. The French case with SISU, which can be translated as emergency situations interoperability framework, kind of. It's a protocol for interoperability between emergency situations between different emergency stakeholders, which is indeed based on an international standard, the EDXL DE specification, and it was first used in the Paris metropolis for data sharing between the stage 1 PSAP and the emergency response organizations such as fire brigades, police, and medical control rooms. So those are two examples of national standards together with the Irish one that are worth mentioning. And in the next slide, in fact, we have another one, which is in the UK. UK defined their MATE multi-agency incident transfer standard back in 2013 as well. So I guess it's quite old already, this concept. And it's an XML schema, and it's an open standard for electronically sharing information, incidental information between the different stakeholders. And the sponsors for this were BAPCO, the British Association, and the Joint Emergency Services Group in Wales. And those were the first ones to implement this MATE approach. And it's an implementation that's done via a hub, a cloud hub, and the connectivity to this hub can be achieved with minor enhancements in existing CAD systems. So it's easy to implement, easy to deploy, and it's being used in category 1 emergency services, category 2 emergency services like the highway patrols and things like the highway and agencies, sorry, not patrols, emergency response organizations, voluntary groups, and relevant stakeholders. So this is also an approach that's quite interesting, because it's whoever wants it can connect to this hub and deploy the interoperability between systems. In the right, you have the example of several examples of Spain, in fact, because Spanish regions, several of them are using EDXL framework-based interoperability systems to share information between the regional 112 PSAPs and, for instance, national police, or the regional 112 PSAP and emergency medical services, like in Extremadura or Madrid region, and even in cross-border cooperation. For instance, the Galicia region is cooperating with together with Portuguese counterparts and also another region of Spain, and they share information during incident situations. I think there's a comment about the UCRI, so we will have a look at it in the Q&A section. Thank you, Christophe. So if we move to the last slide in the block, we know that the European Civil Protection Mechanism is maintaining information exchanges with EU members when the activations of the EU Civil Protection Mechanism happens during crisis situations. And as the ERCC acts as central 24/7 contact point, I mean, there's obviously a need for data exchange. We don't have much more information about how and when they do these exchanges, but of course, if any of you have more information about that, that would be great. And the last use cases, the last two use cases are about research projects in which either pre-standardization was tackled, or the mission critical video sharing aspects were tackled. So you have two examples: strategy first for defining standards, and Broadway next for dealing with broadband communication requirements in public safety operations and crisis situations. So let's move to the Q&A section. And in fact, there is a comment about UCRI. Christina?
Yes, I have seen it. Let's read it if I able to. So we have a comment from Christoph. ORCI was developed in Germany primarily for the exchange between PSAPs. It is currently in use in the federal states mentioned for the exchange between control centers and call centers for non-acute medical complaints, 116, 117. So that is a data exchange between 112 and 116, 117.
Sorry, but not in acute medical complaints. Maybe if you want, Christoph, if you raise your hand, you could speak and comment on it.
Yes, this would be great.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you here.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. The first version of the UCRI standard in Germany is only a data explanation and no standards for exchange. And so it's a very expensive thing to establish these standards. So only in use cases with a high urgent demand, it is implemented now. I think in some years we will see the UCRI exchange also between PSAPs, but at the moment it's only established between the 116, 117 and 112 at the same regional areas.
Well, thank you for clarifying that for us. Of course, the experts know best, so I'm not expecting to be considered an expert in UCRI, that's for sure. So, Christina, Q&A session.
Yes, first, thank you for this point. You were mentioning about that it's an expensive implementation to implement this standard. this is something that, of course, we need also to mention that it's not always easy to implement these standards. So we have seen that there are different levels of standards. It can be regional, it can be national, it can be international. It's very difficult to know what to implement and how. We have another question from Erika. Is there an overlap between all these standards? What is the most common? So yes, Irache.
Yeah, I don't think there's much overlap because I mean, when countries, regions see that nothing makes a lot of sense to them in terms of standardization, they will develop their own standards, like they did in Germany, like they did in Ireland, like they did in the UK. What I've seen is that the most commonly used standardization comes in emergency situations with the EDXL framework, and maybe on crisis situations, maybe there may be other standards that are in play. But yeah, we've seen more and more the EDXL framework being deployed in different regions and countries. And I don't know if Kieran and Christina can want to comment more on this.
In terms of overlap, I think many of the standards are the not standards that are there, as you pointed out, will do the same thing. So in terms of that in itself is a level of overlap. They're achieving the same function, but in terms of the implementation will be different. I think EDXL is probably the one where it might be all encompassing. But if you look at MATE and the German implementation, or the German standards, it was UCRI, was it? It sounds like they do a very, very similar thing. But I haven't seen the German implementation, but I have seen the UK MATE implementation. In fact, the Irish Emergency Services are looking closely at it for the use case where multiple services need to be involved in the same incident, and they need to pass incident data between each other. But I would expect that many of the standards or implementations will incorporate that, but in a different way. So yeah, again, hence the need for a single, a recommended approach.
Yes.
Or a recommended set of standards to use for the exchange of data.
Yeah, I mean, and in fact, there may be multiple standards that apply to your own case, or there may be things that you may not have covered with only one standard, and in this case, it would be interesting to actually the technical recommendations also mention how and what from different standards can be implemented. So
And
I don't
actually,
know.
just coming back to Erica's last comment there, with regard to sharing cross-border, that is actually one of the primary drivers for implementation of MATE among the emergency services in Ireland, in that it has the potential to allow them to pass instance or data, or even pass a call with all of the data collected across the border to Northern Ireland, or vice versa. As you know, we share a land border with the UK, and the services in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland operate, very closely together, and they do cooperate. So the use of a standard such as MATE allows them to do that even more seamlessly.
Indeed,
Sorry,
indeed. No, it's a very good and pertinent comment. I'm looking at the unfortunately in German comment in the conversation, the last one. Thank you for the added information. Christina, you want to comment on this?
Yes, so we have here to compare for all interested, UCRI. So we have here two links. And so they are in German, but as Irache mentioned, you can use some translation. And I would agree with Kiran when he says that there's already some overlap if there are many standards giving an answer to the same use case. So for me, this would be an overlap already. Perhaps they are not exactly the same. But here the point is that perhaps also for an operational point of view, the needs of the different countries are so different, or they are, I don't know, it's difficult to understand because the information shouldn't be so different from one country to another, but it looks like it's very, very different, so that the information to be shared is not the same in Germany or in France or in Spain. So for me, it's surprising, but it's the case. Another reason could be that as there's no mandatory international standard, each country is really doing what they can, and of course they have only competence for their territory.
And in some countries like Spain, for instance, the competences are even more fragmented. Regionally, differences are quite clear between two neighboring regions in the same country. But yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be so far away from being able to share data between different countries or regions. But it all depends on how the information is structured and how much capability the different systems have to actually be interoperable between each other. And yeah, sharing use cases between neighboring countries, regions, and so on. Yes, we need a standard for standards. Sharing information between same situations or similar situations between countries neighboring each other, regions neighboring each other, or even far away. It's very important, and it's part of the recommendations we want to mention in the next section. So should we move to the last section?
Yes, of course.
And of course, the recommendations. What would an EENA document be without the recommendation sections? So first of all, we discussed already, a standardization authority shouldn't be waiting for, shouldn't wait to be pushed for public by public or private organizations to start work to normalize data, ideally. But of course, we know, as Christina mentioned, that they normally are contribution based. And for that reason, both public safety entities and vendors, system vendors and public authorities should be pushing for normalization of data to be exchanged between public safety entities between different countries, within a region, or whatever. And of course, as there is a lack of standardization in the subject in Europe, at least, these public safety organizations, entities, as we put in this slide, should be pushing for more standardization on the field, mostly because not only they need to share information more and more on this data-centric uh, age, let's say, uh, data is there to be shared and data is available to be used in crisis and emergency situations, but they need to be understandable by all parties. So yeah, it's important to contribute to standard definition, and then of course worked with your neighbors, neighboring regions, countries on this standardization and regulation, and also regulation bodies that exist within countries and internationally as well. Of course, we need to be mindful of the new regulations on data privacy and data protection and data consent, sharing consent requirements. And it is key that best practices and even worst practices are shared, so we learn from each other. And for vendors like the company I represent, I come from, we should build solutions that are compliant with the standards and also allow sharing information, even if there is no standard, but at least it's in an understandable way, avoiding black boxes, making APIs that are adaptable to the different requirements and the standards, because same API may not be usable in two different countries if it's not adaptable. And without further ado, we arrived at the last Q&A section. So, Christina?
Yes, and we have here one comment from Bruno. Can we take advantage on AIDO standard for the US and adopt it in the EU. I think something similar was done with Oasis CAP. Just 1 second, I have lost the chat. CAP about 15 years ago.
I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning, the ADO EENA JSON ADO specification and the Open API is available in GitHub. So I don't know if someone has time to look into that and propose maybe an European standard based on that. We did. Wouldn't be the first time we do something similar, not just with CAP from EDXL CAP, which is from a US company and has been adopted in Europe for many years now. So yeah, of course, collaboration between different regions of the world when things work are very interesting. And if there's no standard in Europe, maybe that would be the standard. I don't know. What do you think?
So I guess that this would be better than what we have today with so many national standards. But well, then we speak about standards, but then there's no they are recommended, so there's no obligation to follow this standard usually in as it's not mandatory. So also a standard needs to be promoted in most of the cases, well known, and of course this is also something that we need to work on. I see another comment or question from Marcus. Does any of the mentioned standards provide recommendations about protecting, securing data connections? For example, the usage of client server certificates.
The answer to that is yes. Many of the standards mentioned already, mostly the national standards mentioned, cover these aspects because, of course, they do have the most information about the needs of the systems in each country and so on. So, but yeah, normally these standards cover data security, data protection, and so on within them. And I mean, there's a lot of information that you can read about it. It's available online. We've put some links in the presentation. Kiran?
Yeah, the other aspect that's important when considering sort of protecting the data is actually auditing access. So you need to know who has retrieved data, about what particular call or data item they've retrieved and when. It's sort of it's fairly basic and standard stuff, but it's something that does get forgotten, and it's something I haven't actually seen in some of the. But obviously, it's it's implementation specific. So if you look at Mate, for example, then that is a function that would need to be implemented in the Mate hub, right? And there isn't actually a recommendations on how that's done, but it is something that must be done. For our platform, we audit everything, so we know who retrieved what data and when. But yes, again, secure connections, secure private connections,
Traceability.
traceability. And we don't use client certs, but we do use server certs, obviously. No, I'm going to have to apologize. I do have to run. I have a conflict now, so if you don't mind, I'll say bye to everyone.
Thank you, Kiran.
Thank you, everyone. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Kiran.
See you. Bye.
Bye. And
So,
I think there's another comment.
Yes, I was reading it. Is NFPA standard 1225 for emergency services communications usage common or well known in Europe?
I don't know, to be honest. So we'll look into that and get back to you. If anyone in the audience knows the answer, that would be appreciated. But I'm not aware of this being a common standard.
I think we can say that it's not well known.
Yes.
If
at least the two of us, that's for
we
sure.
can say
yeah.
that it's not well known. Perhaps it's known, but it's not a standard that everybody is aware of. That's for sure.
So, any other questions or comments? Any experiences on multi-agency collaboration, or sorry, recommendations on multi-agency collaboration, on cross-border collaboration that you may have? The floor is yours if you want to intervene. Raise your hand or write the question. Up to you.
Okay, so I think we can.
There's one.
Here we have Erika. Could standards like this also be helpful for TPS, third-party service providers who work with emergency services and, well, for example, fire alarms, etc.?
Yeah, the example is EDXL CAP, for instance. It's used a lot for alarm systems to be interoperable with PSAP systems. So CAP is one of the mechanisms used, for instance, in parts of Spain when a fire alarm or automatic alarm is triggered to actually send the message to the PSAP and updates to the PSAP. So yeah, of course, it could be.
Erika would like to learn more about it.
Yeah, you look into the EDXL CAP. It's available online, and you will. Yeah, well, I can send you some example of use case about it. But definitely, I mean, as I said, CAP is used mostly for public warning, but not just for public warning.
Any questions or comments? Otherwise, I think we can close the webinar. Thank you very much, Irache, for this presentation. Thank you also for your participation, for your questions and comments. On the screen, you will see now the next webinars that will be organized by EENA. So don't hesitate to join. First of all, you need to register. And then, of course, you will be more than welcome. And you will also receive a post-webinar survey link to share your thoughts on today's webinar. So we will very much appreciate your feedback, and we would like to hear your thoughts. And that is left to say is that thank you again, and to wish you a great day and rest of the week.
Thank you all. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.